I don't think I can sit around and worry about it. It would be very nice if it did happen, but I can't do anything about it. I've done all I can do, so I have to wait and see how other people have viewed what we all did, as a matter of fact, in our careers.
Just didn't look like he was as intense as he played. I don't know. I always called him. I always thought of him as sort of the silent assassin. You know, he's so unassuming. He comes up to the plate, you know, kind of nice and soft, and all of a sudden, right.
Carlton Fisk did not hide the way he felt about certain players. He was a Hall of Fame catcher. He played 24 seasons in the major leagues, from 1969 all the way to 1993. He caught 2,499 games. That is more than almost anyone who has ever played the position. People respected him for it. They knew he was durable. They knew he never took a single playoff. That part of his story is easy to admire. But there is another part. Fisk spent his whole career colliding with other people. He argued with them. He shouted at them. He shoved them. Sometimes he punched them. And 5 players in particular found out exactly how far he was willing to go. Before we get into them, if you are enjoying this one, use the hype feature and give this video some hype. It takes a second, and it helps the story reach more baseball fans. Now, let us get back to Fisk. The most famous name on this list is probably Thurman Munson. In August of 1973, the two catchers crashed into each other at home plate in Boston. It turned into a huge bench-clearing brawl. Both dugouts emptied onto the field. Fisk and Munson threw punches at each other while they were tangled on the ground. That fight is still shown and talked about today, but here's the part people forget. That was not a one-time loss of temper. Munson was not the only player who could set Fisk off. He was not even close. So, we are going to count them down. We will start at number 5 and work our way to number 1. Some of these men wore a different uniform. Some of them wore the same one Fisk did. A few of them traded punches with him. A few of them never laid a finger on him at all. But every single one of them ended up on the wrong side of a man who believed there was one correct way to play baseball. And Fisk was never quiet about telling people when they got it wrong. Number 5 is Alan Gallagher. Most fans have never heard that name. He was a third baseman for the California Angels. He was not a superstar. He was not a household name. He did not have a nickname that fans still repeat. And that is exactly why he belongs on this list. On May 30th, 1973, the Angels were playing the Red Sox at Fenway Park. There was a play at home plate. After that play, Gallagher and Fisk got into a heated confrontation in the middle of the field. That is what the record shows. The two of them ended up face to face in front of everyone. We are not going to invent the details of what was said. Nobody needs a made-up version of it. What matters is the timing. This happened in 1973. Fisk was still in the early part of his career. He had been the American League Rookie of the Year the season before. He was still young. He was still supposed to be earning his place. And already he was standing in the middle of a diamond arguing with a player from another team. That is worth sitting with for a second. Most young catchers spend their first years trying not to make waves. They are trying to learn the pitching staff. They are trying to stay in the lineup. They are trying to avoid trouble with people who have been in the league longer than they have. Fisk did the opposite. He walked straight into trouble, and he did it early. There is a reason home plate produced so many of these moments. It is the only base a runner has to reach where another player is legally allowed to stand in the way. Everywhere else on the field, the fielder waits for the ball and applies a tag. At home plate in that era, the catcher planted himself in the path, took the throw, and braced for a body coming in at full speed. The runner had one job: get in. The catcher had one job: keep him out. There was no polite way to solve that problem. Somebody had to lose. Fisk treated that patch of dirt like it belonged to him personally. Not to the team, not to the league, to him. And when someone tried to take it, or tried to argue with him about how he had defended it, he did not shrug it off and jog back to his position. There is one more thing worth understanding about the job Fisk was doing, because it explains a lot of what follows. The catcher is the only player on the field who faces the other 8. He sees everything. He calls the pitches. He sets the defense. He is the closest thing a baseball team has to a quarterback. Good catchers do not just receive the ball. They run the game. That role can turn into something else if a player takes it too far. Running the game is a job description. Policing the game is a choice. Fisk seemed to hear both in the same sentence. If he was in charge of what happened between the lines, then in his mind he was also entitled to have an opinion about how everyone else behaved out there. Most catchers keep that opinion to themselves. He did not. Gallagher matters because of the company his name keeps. When people list the opponents who helped build Fisk's reputation as one of the most confrontational players in the league, Gallagher's name shows up right next to Thurman Munson, Frank Robinson, and Greg Nettles. Those are big names. Gallagher is not. And yet, there he is, in the same sentence for the same reason. That tells you something uncomfortable. If Fisk only clashed with famous, aggressive stars, you could argue those men brought it on themselves. Stars have egos. Stars push back, but a role player from the Angels ended up in a shouting match with him too. That is harder to explain away. It starts to look less like Fisk responding to certain difficult opponents, and more like Fisk simply being the common ingredient. When the same man keeps turning up in the middle of these scenes, the pattern gets difficult to ignore. It should be said that Fisk was not a constant complainer by nature. He did not chirp at every opponent who walked past him. That is part of what makes these moments stand out. He picked his fights, and once he picked one, he did not let it go until somebody physically made him. The trouble was how often something qualified. Number 4 is Frank Robinson. Frank Robinson was not a role player. He was a giant of the sport. He was an intimidating veteran slugger with an uncompromising style of his own. He had spent years making pitchers uncomfortable and making younger players nervous. By 1973, he was playing for the California Angels, and he carried the kind of reputation that usually made people step aside. Fisk did not step aside. On August 12, 1973, the Red Sox hosted the Angels at Fenway Park. Boston reliever Bobby Bolin threw 2 brushback pitches in a row up near Robinson's head. A brushback is a pitch thrown close to a hitter on purpose. It is meant to move him off the plate and make him uncomfortable. 2 in a row up around the head is not something a hitter forgets. To understand why Robinson reacted the way he did, you have to understand what that meant in 1973. Batting helmets were nothing like the ones players wear now. A pitch near the head was not a scare tactic. It was a genuine danger. Careers had ended that way. So when a hitter got buzzed twice in a row up around the ears, he was not being oversensitive. He was reacting to something that could have seriously injured him. Robinson turned around and started jawing at Fisk. He accused the young catcher of calling for those pitches. That accusation is important because the catcher is the one who signals which pitch gets thrown. Robinson was not blaming the pitcher. He was blaming the kid crouched behind him. Then Robinson warned Fisk to tell his pitcher to throw the ball over the plate. At that moment, Fisk had an easy way out. He was a young catcher. Robinson was a legend. He could have said nothing. He could have let it go. He could have let his manager or his pitcher handle it. Instead, Fisk got aggressive right back and confronted him. Both benches emptied. Boston pitcher Luis Tiant came charging out of the dugout. Angels infielder Bob Oliver had to be held back by 5 men to keep him from getting to Fisk. Think about that number. 5 grown men pulling one player away because of an argument a catcher chose not to walk away from. After the game, the Angels were not shy about how they felt. Robinson said Fisk was only brave when there were other people around. Angels manager Bobby Winkles criticized the catcher publicly. Angels outfielder Tom McCraw predicted that Fisk was going to get hit by a pitch before the season was over. That is not casual trash talk. That is a warning about what was coming for him. And Fisk offered nothing in response. No comment, no apology, no attempt to smooth it over. Now you can look at that 2 ways. You can call it fearless. Plenty of people did. But there is another reading, and it is the one that keeps showing up in this story. Baseball in that era ran on a seniority system. Veterans got a certain amount of respect from younger players, whether they had earned it that particular day or not. Fisk showed no interest in that system at all. A Hall of Fame slugger with years of service walked up to him, and Fisk treated it like an argument he was entitled to win. There was a reason that system existed. It was not just about ego. Older players had survived the league. They had been through the travel, the injuries, the slumps, and the years of scrutiny. The deference they got was a form of shorthand. It said that experience counted for something, and that a man who had done the job for 15 years had earned the benefit of the doubt in a disagreement with someone who had done it for 2. Fisk rejected that idea completely, and he rejected it in public, in front of 2 full dugouts. To him, the argument was about who was right, and service time did not factor into that. There is a version of this where that looks admirable. Nobody should have to accept an unfair accusation just because the accuser is famous. But there is also a version where a young player is picking a fight he could easily have avoided with a man who could not simply be brushed off in front of an entire ballpark. Some people call that competitive equality. Others call it arrogance. An entire opposing clubhouse chose the second word. And this was the second time in about 3 months that Fisk had been at the center of a confrontation with a California Angels player at Fenway Park. Same ballpark, same opponent, same catcher standing in the middle of it. There is a fair point here in Fisk's favor, and it should be said plainly. His own pitcher was the one who threw at Robinson's head. Fisk was defending his pitcher, and catchers are supposed to do that. But defending a pitcher does not require escalation. He could have taken the complaint and moved on. He chose the version that emptied both dugouts. Number 3 is Deion Sanders. This one is different from the rest, and that difference is the whole point. By May 22, 1990, Fisk was 42 years old. He had left Boston years earlier and was playing for the Chicago White Sox. He was the elder statesman of the sport. Most players his age are trying to survive the season. He was still crouching behind the plate and still watching everything. The White Sox were at Yankee Stadium. In the New York outfield was a 22-year-old rookie named Deion Sanders. Sanders was a two-sport athlete who played professional football as well as baseball. He was flashy. He was confident. He was part of a new generation of athletes who understood attention and were not embarrassed to want it. Fisk was the exact opposite. The gap between them was not just 20 years. It was two completely different ideas about what a professional athlete is supposed to look like. The trouble started with a pop-up. Sanders hit the ball in the air, and instead of sprinting up the line, he trotted. He assumed it would be caught, so he did not bother running it out. Fisk saw it from behind the plate and lost his temper. He shouted at Sanders to run the ball out. Stop and consider that. Sanders was not on his team. He was not his responsibility. He was a rookie on the other side of the field, and his own manager, his own coaches, and his own veteran teammates were all sitting right there in the Yankee dugout. Fisk decided it was his job anyway. Sanders ignored him and strolled back to the dugout. That should have been the end of it. It was not. When Sanders came back to the plate in the 5th inning, he took his bat and drew a dollar sign in the dirt at Fisk's feet. It was a message. It was a young player telling an old one that he was not interested in the lecture. Fisk went off. He ripped his catcher's mask off, stepped right into the rookie's face, and threatened to fight him on the spot. Both benches cleared again. No punches landed this time. The umpires issued warnings and got everyone back where they belonged. But there it was again. Another confrontation. Another game stopped. Another dugout emptied because Fisk would not let something go. Afterward, Fisk explained himself, he said there was a right way and a wrong way to play the game. He talked about the pride that came with the Yankee uniform and said the great players of the past would be turning over in their graves at what he had just seen. He said that even as an opponent, the selfishness of it offended him. And he said a player has to earn certain stripes before he acts like that. That is a real argument, and plenty of fans agreed with it then and still agree with it now. Hustle is free. Running out a pop-up costs nothing. Pop-ups get dropped. Fielders lose the ball in the sun or in the lights. It does not happen often, but it happens. And a runner who was jogging cannot suddenly turn a mistake into a base hit. So the complaint was not made up. There was baseball logic underneath it. But look at the position Fisk put himself in. He was 42 years old, wearing a Chicago uniform, standing in Yankee Stadium, telling a New York rookie how to honor New York history. Nobody asked him to do that. He was not a coach. He was not a captain of that team. He appointed himself. There is a difference between having a point and appointing yourself to deliver it. The Yankees had a manager. They had coaches. They had veterans in that clubhouse whose actual job included telling a young player how the team expected him to behave. Not one of them needed the opposing catcher to handle it for them. If Sanders was going to be corrected, that correction was supposed to come from inside his own dugout, where it might have actually landed. Instead, it came from a stranger on the other team, shouted across the field in the middle of a game. Nothing about that was ever going to work. It did not sound like guidance. It sounded like a scolding, and Sanders responded exactly the way most 22-year-olds would when scolded by an opponent. He pushed back. The dollar sign in the dirt was a bad idea, but it was a reaction, not the start of it. And that is the uncomfortable part of the whole Fisk story. He was often correct about the principle. He was frequently the wrong person to be making the point, at the wrong moment, in the loudest possible way. And this is where the picture starts to sharpen. Up to now, you might explain his fights as self-defense. A runner came in hard, so he fought back. A slugger accused him of something, so he answered. Sanders never touched him. Sanders never even spoke to him first. All Sanders did was jog when Fisk thought he should run. That was enough. So the standard was never really about protecting himself. It was about enforcement. Fisk had a personal code, and he expected the rest of the sport to live by it. When somebody did not, he stepped in, whatever uniform that person was wearing, and however little it had to do with him. Number 2 is Lou Piniella. If the Sanders story shows Fisk at his most self-appointed, this one shows him at his most explosive. It is also the moment where his temper stopped being his problem alone and started costing other people something real. May 20th, 1976. Yankee Stadium, bottom of the 6th inning. Lou Piniella was standing on second base for New York. Greg Nettles was on first. Otto Velez hit a single into right field. Piniella took off, and Boston right fielder Dwight Evans came up throwing. The throw handcuffed Fisk. That means it came in awkwardly, forcing him to adjust his body at the last second, and that adjustment put him directly in the baseline with a runner bearing down on him. Piniella did not slow up. He came in feet first, straight into Fisk. The collision was violent. Both men ended up tangled together on top of home plate, and then Fisk took a swing at him. That detail deserves attention because it changes how you read the whole thing. The collision itself was ugly, but collisions were part of the game in 1976. Nobody was going to suspend a runner for sliding hard into a catcher. Fisk was not defending himself from an ongoing attack at that point. The play was over. They were both on the ground. He threw the punch that turned a hard slide into a brawl. It is also worth noting who put Fisk in that spot, because it was not Piniella. It was his own right fielder's throw. Evans made a strong play and the ball arrived awkwardly. Fisk had to move into the baseline to catch it. Piniella, running full speed from second base with his head down, had no way to avoid a catcher who arrived in his path at the last second. Neither man really did anything wrong up to the point of contact. That is what makes what followed so telling. There was no villain in the collision. The fight had to be chosen, and Fisk chose it. Both benches emptied. Pitchers and position players came sprinting in from everywhere and swarmed the plate. And once that happened, nobody could control what came next. That last part is the whole problem with baseball fights, and it is why the sport eventually moved away from them. The two men who started it are usually the safest people in the pile. They get grabbed and pulled apart within seconds. The damage happens on the edges, to whoever runs in late, whoever gets hit from behind, whoever lands wrong under 300 pounds of other people. Once a bench clears, nobody is in charge of anything. The man who threw the first punch does not get to decide where it stops. Red Sox pitcher Bill Lee ran in from the mound to join the pile. Lee was one of the most outspoken and unusual personalities in the sport. Years earlier, after the 1973 fight with Munson, Lee had mocked the Yankees publicly. He asked Fisk whether Gene Michael had scratched him with his purse, and said the Yankees were like a group of hookers swinging their handbags. It was the kind of comment that got laughs in Boston and got remembered in New York. The Yankees remembered. When Lee arrived at the pile, Greg Nettles grabbed him and slammed him to the turf. Nettles was a Yankee third baseman who played with the same hard edge Fisk did, which made every meeting between those two clubs more combustible. The slam tore a ligament in Lee's shoulder. While Lee was lying on his side, hurt, Yankee center fielder Mickey Rivers hit him in the back. That still was not the end. After the first wave calmed down, an angry Lee went after Nettles again. Nettles punched him in the face and gave him a black eye. Afterward, Nettles was completely unapologetic. He said Lee had come at him after sneaking around the pile, and that he wanted to make sure Lee did not get hit with anybody's purse. He threw Lee's old joke right back in his face. Now here is why this matters so much more than a typical baseball fight. Bill Lee had won 17 games in each of the 3 previous seasons. He was one of the best pitchers Boston had. The shoulder injury from that pile kept him out for months and permanently changed how effective he was on the mound. He was never the same pitcher again. Boston lost a 17-game winner in the middle of a division race, and the season was thrown off course. Nobody planned that. Nettles did not set out to end a man's peak years, but it happened. And it happened inside a brawl that started when Fisk threw a punch at a runner who had already finished sliding. That is the cost that gets left out of the highlight reel. Fights like this get replayed as entertainment. Grainy footage, a crowd on its feet, players in wool uniforms swinging at each other. It looks almost fun from a distance. It was not fun for Bill Lee. His career took a hit he never fully recovered from, and he was on Fisk's own team. This is also the second time we have seen the exact same trigger. A runner came home. Fisk stood his ground. Contact happened, and instead of the play simply ending, punches followed. Munson in 1973, Piniella in 1976. Different opponent, same result, 3 years apart. Whatever lesson the first brawl might have taught, it clearly did not change how Fisk handled the second one. Number 1 is Thurman, Munson. Everything else on this list was a moment. This was a war, and it lasted years. Fisk and Munson were both catchers. Fisk was in Boston. Munson was the captain in New York. They played the same position for the two teams that hated each other most. That alone would have created friction. But what turned it personal was something neither man controlled. The media loved comparing them, and the comparison was not flattering to Munson. National broadcasters, including Kurt Godey, regularly presented Fisk as the handsome, athletic young star, the next great catcher, the heir to Johnny Bench. Munson was often left in the background of those conversations, even though his run production numbers were better. He resented that narrative deeply. Fisk, for his part, saw Munson's aggressive style as a direct threat to his control of the field. So you had two men playing the same demanding position, in the same rivalry, being measured against each other constantly, with one of them convinced he was being cheated by the coverage. It was never going to end quietly. It is worth pausing on how strange that setup was. Most rivalries in sport are between teams, and the individual players are just the people who happen to be wearing the jerseys that year. This one was different. Every time these two teams played, the sport put its two best catchers on the same field and invited everyone to compare them directly, inning by inning. There was no hiding from it, and no way to share the credit. If one of them looked better that night, the other one looked worse by definition. Add to that the fact that catching is the most physically punishing job in baseball. Squatting for 9 innings, foul balls off the hands and the mask, backswings off the shoulder, runners arriving at full speed. Catchers tend to be stubborn people because the position does not let anyone else survive it. Now take two of the most stubborn men in the league, put them in the most bitter rivalry in the sport, and tell them for years that only one of them can be considered the best. It came apart on August 1st, 1973 at Fenway Park. The game was tied 2-2 in the 9th inning. Munson was on third base, representing the go-ahead run. Yankee batter Gene Michael, nicknamed Stick, tried a suicide squeeze bunt off Boston pitcher John Curtis. On a suicide squeeze, the runner at third breaks for home as the pitch is delivered, and the batter has to make contact. If he misses, the runner is hung out to dry. Michael missed the pitch completely. Munson was already charging down the line at full speed. Michael knew it, and he stayed planted in the batter's box to physically block Fisk from making the play. Fisk shoved him out of the way, set his feet, and took the full force of Munson's body. He held on to the ball. The out was recorded. The play, by any normal definition, was finished. Munson did not get up. He stayed on top of Fisk and tried to pin his arms so that Yankee runner Felipe Alou could keep advancing around the bases. Fisk fought his way loose and swung at Munson with his fist. Then Gene Michael grabbed Fisk from behind. Fisk threw Michael to the ground with his left arm while continuing to throw punches at Munson. Both teams poured onto the field. The most revealing account of what happened next came from Yankee manager Ralph Houck, who was trying to break it up. Houck described how frightening Fisk's strength was in that moment. He said Fisk had his left forearm pressed across Michael's throat and would not release it. Houck had to crawl underneath the pile of bodies to physically pry Fisk's arm off Michael's throat before someone got seriously hurt. And while Fisk was pinning Michael down with one arm, he was still punching Munson with the other underneath the pile. Read that again. A major league manager crawled into the middle of a brawl, not to separate two fighters, but because he was worried about what one man was doing to another player's throat. That is not a scuffle. That is not a baseball fight where everyone grabs a jersey and waits for it to end. Fisk was fighting two men at once, and one of them needed a third party to intervene for his safety. After the game, a bloodied Munson would not let it go either. He told reporters to go ask Fisk who won the fight, saying Fisk knew the answer. Even with his face cut up, he was still trying to win the argument. That is what made this rivalry the one that defined both men. Neither would concede anything. Not the plate, not the position, not the headline, not the last word after the final out. And Munson is the perfect number one for a reason. He was not a bad man or a dirty player. He was Fisk's mirror image. Same position, same stubbornness, same refusal to be pushed. Put two people like that in the same rivalry, and the collision is not a surprise. It is a matter of scheduling, but it also exposes the thing this whole video keeps circling. Fisk did not have one enemy. He had a temperament that reliably produced enemies. Give him a mirror, and it produced the biggest brawl of his career. Now, the countdown is over, but the story is not, because there is one more piece that changes how you see all of it. Fisk did not save this behavior for people in other uniforms. Go back to August 1972. Fisk was 24 years old, in the middle of his Rookie of the Year season, and he sat down for an interview with a newspaper called the Springfield Union. In that interview, he publicly criticized two of the most respected players in Boston, Carl Yastrzemski and Reggie Smith. Yastrzemski was a franchise icon. Smith was a star outfielder. Fisk accused them of lacking hustle and failing to lead properly. He said they did not seem to understand the effect they had on the rest of the club, and that when they were not aggressive in the outfield or did not show desire, the whole team sagged with them. A rookie said that, in print, about the two biggest names in his own clubhouse. In modern baseball, that would be a major story. In 1972, it was close to unthinkable. Clubhouse business stayed in the clubhouse. Complaints went through veterans, through coaches, through closed doors. A first-year player questioning the effort of established stars in a newspaper broke every unwritten rule the sport had about who was allowed to say what. The reaction was immediate. The Boston media ran with it. Reggie Smith was furious. He threw a newspaper across the clubhouse and disappeared into the trainer's room. Manager Eddie Casco had to call a team meeting to calm everything down, and afterward told the press that Fisk had been misunderstood and had meant no harm by it. Fisk himself tried to lower the temperature. He said it was a hard lesson to learn, and that the story had made his remarks sound malicious when he never intended them that way. That clarification is real, and it belongs in this story. He was young, he was talking to a reporter, and the printed version landed harder than what was in his head. But notice what he did not say. He did not say the criticism was wrong. He said it was not meant as a personal attack. Those are two very different things, and now connected to Deion Sanders. In 1972, a rookie criticized franchise legends on his own team for not hustling. In 1990, a 42-year-old veteran confronted a rookie on another team for not hustling. 18 years apart, at opposite ends of a career, at opposite ends of the seniority ladder, and the complaint had not changed by a single word. That is not a young man's mistake with a reporter. That is who he was for 2 decades. So put the whole pattern together. Munson brought out the rivalry in him, and it turned into the ugliest brawl of his career. Piniella showed that all it took was one hard slide for him to throw the first punch, and that fight cost his own teammate a shoulder and cost his team a season. Nettles and Lee proved how fast one man's temper could spread into chaos that swallowed people who had nothing to do with the original argument. Sanders showed that Fisk did not need to be touched at all. A lazy jog up the line was enough. Robinson showed that no reputation was big enough to make him back off, and an entire opposing clubhouse called him arrogant for it. Gallagher showed the same thing from the other direction, that a player did not need to be a star to end up in a shouting match with him. And Yastrzemski and Smith proved his own teammates were not protected either. 9 names, different situations, different decades, different uniforms, one man standing in the middle of every single one, spread out over 24 seasons. Any one of these could be called bad luck. Every long career has a few bad afternoons in it, but these were not clustered in one rough stretch. They start in his rookie year and run all the way to his 40s. They cross 2 teams, 2 leagues, and 2 completely different eras of baseball. The opponents change. The decade changes. The uniform changes. The behavior does not. At some point, the explanations stop working. You can defend any one of these on its own. Together, they describe a player who expected the entire sport to meet his personal standard and who reacted loudly and often physically when it did not. He was not simply competitive. He was the enforcer of a code that only he had voted on. That made him exhausting to play against, and by his own team's account, occasionally exhausting to play with. And yet, the same qualities that made him so difficult are the reason anyone still tells these stories. His manager in Boston, Eddie Casco, put it about as well as anyone could. He said that if you played against Fisk, you hated him. But if you played with him and you wanted to win, you loved him because he played like he was on a crusade. Both halves of that are true, and they cannot be separated. Fisk cared about effort at a level most players never reach. He refused to be intimidated by anyone, whether it was a Hall of Fame slugger accusing him of throwing at heads or a runner coming in feet first. He believed the game deserved to be played a certain way, and he was willing to take the criticism, the punches, and the hostility that came with saying so out loud. Those beliefs created fights. They created grudges that lasted years. They created a clubhouse meeting in his rookie season and a bench-clearing incident in his 40s. But they also created a career that lasted 24 seasons and 2,499 games behind the plate, a Hall of Fame plaque, and 376 home runs from the hardest position on the field. Players who take the easy road do not last that long. Whatever else you want to say about him, nobody ever accused Carlton Fisk of taking the easy road. It is also fair to say that the sport he played in has changed changed enormously since then. Home plate collisions of the kind that started 2 of these brawls are no longer allowed. Charging the mound and clearing the benches carries real punishment now. A player who behaved in 1976 the way that entire generation behaved would be suspended within a week today. Fisk was not operating outside the standards of his era. He was operating at the extreme end of them, which is a different criticism and a smaller one. What he was not, at any point, was indifferent. Plenty of players collect a paycheck, avoid trouble, and go home. Nobody ever had to wonder whether Carlton Fisk cared about the outcome of a baseball game. So maybe the honest way to finish this is not to decide whether he was right or wrong. Maybe it is just to notice what he was. Whether a player respected him, fought him, avoided him, or spent 20 years resenting him, not one of them could pretend he was not there. Carlton Fisk was many things over 24 seasons in the major leagues. Easy to ignore was never one of them.